On August 14th, 2022, 59-year-old Karen Mitchell boarded the Ocean Star, a luxury cruise liner departing Miami. To her friends, it looked like a long-awaited vacation. To Karen, it was something more, a chance to finally meet the man she had been speaking with for months online. She believed it was the beginning of a love story, a romantic escape with someone who made her feel seen. But it would not end that way. Within a week, Karen would vanish. Investigators would uncover the truth. She had not disappeared by accident. She had been lured, targeted, and handed over to traffickers. What began as a date with a lover she trusted became one of the most disturbing crimes in recent maritime history. Chapter 1. A Journey at Sea. Karen Mitchell was a 59-year-old woman living a quiet, solitary life in Tampa, Florida. She had never married, and though she had friends and coworkers, she often confided that she felt invisible. Like many in her position, she turned to the internet for companionship. Months earlier, she had met a man named Jason Reed through a social networking site. Jason, just 22 years old, introduced himself as a college student with dreams of travel and adventure. Despite the vast age gap, their conversations quickly grew intense. Jason showered Karen with attention, told her she was beautiful, and spoke of how age meant nothing when two people connected. For Karen, it was intoxicating. Friends noticed she was more energetic, more talkative, and more hopeful about life. She told one close confidant that she had finally found someone who understood her. After months of online messages, phone calls, and late-night chats, Jason suggested they take a trip together. A cruise, he said, would be the perfect way to meet face-to-face, away from the distractions of everyday life. Karen agreed. She booked her ticket for the Ocean Star and told friends she was going on vacation with a man she had been seeing. Few details were shared. She simply said she was excited, nervous but excited. On August 14th, she stepped aboard the ship believing she was beginning a new chapter with the man she loved. What she didn't know was that Jason Reed was not who he claimed to be. He wasn't a student, and he wasn't a romantic partner. He was a trafficker, working as a recruiter for an organized criminal network. The cruise was not a date. It was a setup. Karen's vulnerability, her desire for connection, and her trust had been carefully cultivated for months. The Ocean Star was not her escape into romance. It was the stage where Jason's plan would unfold. Chapter 2. The Encounter. When Karen Mitchell and Jason Reed met on the Ocean Star, it was not a chance encounter. It was the culmination of months of online communication that had convinced Karen she was finally meeting the man of her dreams. On the first evening of the cruise, passengers noticed them together at dinner. Karen, usually quiet and reserved, appeared animated, smiling, and engaged. Jason leaned close to her, speaking in a low, reassuring tone, the way one might with someone already deeply familiar. To observers, it looked like the two were an established couple rather than new acquaintances. For Karen, this was a confirmation of everything she had hoped. Jason was attentive, affectionate, and made her feel valued. She believed she had stepped into the beginning of a love story that would change the rest of her life. But Jason's role was never romantic. Investigators later confirmed that he was working as a recruiter for a trafficking operation. His job was to identify vulnerable individuals, earn their trust, and create opportunities to isolate them. Months of messaging had been preparation. The cruise trip was locked. In the days that followed, Karen and Jason were inseparable. They ate meals together, walked the ship's decks, and attended entertainment shows as a pair. Fellow passengers later recalled how Jason seemed to take charge, ordering drinks, deciding where they would sit, and steering conversations. Karen followed his lead, seemingly content to let him guide their time together. The age gap drew quite attention. A 59-year-old woman with a 22-year-old man was unusual in the eyes of other travelers. Some speculated it was a holiday romance, while others assumed Karen had simply found companionship after years of being alone. Few considered the possibility that something sinister was unfolding. Yet subtle signs were there. Witnesses later told investigators that Jason avoided discussing details about his personal life. His stories about school and family shifted slightly, depending on who was listening. One crew member noticed that he often positioned himself between Karen and others, as if controlling her access to outside contact. Karen, however, seemed unfazed. She was radiant, energized, and clearly enamored. After years of feeling invisible, she finally felt seen. For her, the cruise was a dream, time away from judgment, shared with a man who made her feel important. But beneath the surface, Jason was working to solidify control. He encouraged Karen to spend more time alone with him, away from group activities. He suggested private walks at night on the upper decks, places less crowded and less visible. He spoke of plans beyond the cruise, hinting at a future together, deepening her emotional dependence. What Karen experienced as love and commitment was, in reality, grooming and manipulation. Jason's charm was not affection. It was a tactic. His goal was to cut her off from others, build her trust to the point of blind loyalty, and prepare her for what was to come. To those around them, it looked like an unlikely romance. To Jason and the network he served, it was the early stage of a carefully orchestrated crime. Chapter 3. The Recruitment. By the fifth day of the cruise, Karen Mitchell's relationship with Jason Reed appeared to be in full bloom. They were rarely apart. Surveillance cameras documented them together at nearly every meal, at evening shows, and strolling hand in hand across the ship's decks. To outside observers, the connection seemed strong, if unconventional. But beneath the appearance of a whirlwind romance, Jason was following a plan. Investigators later identified his behaviors as hallmarks of grooming and recruitment. Each step was designed to erode Karen's independence and ensure her reliance on him. The first stage was emotional reinforcement. Jason frequently told Karen how lucky he was to have met her, how she was different from anyone else, and how he felt safe with her. He called her special and insisted that age meant nothing. These statements, repeated in different ways, worked to strengthen Karen's belief that their connection was rare and genuine. The second stage was isolation. Jason gradually drew her away from larger groups. At first, they sat among other passengers at events, but by the end of the week, they spent more time in secluded areas of the ship, quiet corners of the lounge, empty sections of the deck at night, or long walks down less traveled corridors. Witnesses remembered seeing Karen less frequently on her own. Jason was always nearby, often guiding her by the hand or placing an arm around her shoulders. The third stage was dependency. Jason spoke often of the future. He told Karen they should plan another trip together. He suggested she consider visiting him in his hometown after the cruise. He even floated the idea of them living together someday. For Karen, who had spent much of her life alone, the thought of a committed relationship was intoxicating. For Jason, it was a tactic to deepen her trust and make her more pliable. By this point, Karen's attachment to Jason was strong enough that red flags no longer registered. When he occasionally disappeared for an hour or two, she did not question it. When his explanations about his life were inconsistent, she overlooked the discrepancies. When he suggested they skip certain activities she had been excited to attend, she agreed without hesitation. Behind the scenes, Jason was in contact with others. Digital forensics later revealed that he had been sending messages during those unexplained absences. These communications were directed to members of an organized trafficking network. He was updating them, coordinating details, and confirming the plan. The Ocean Star had nearly a week left at sea, and Jason's task was to ensure Karen would be compliant when the time came. By the seventh night, he had succeeded. Karen was completely devoted, emotionally tied to a man she believed was her lover. She was unaware that she was being prepared not for a future together, but for a handoff into captivity. What Karen experienced as romance was, in truth, recruitment. Every gesture, every compliment, every promise was calculated. She was not being courted. She was being conditioned. Chapter 4. The Disappearance. On the night of August 20th, the Ocean Star hosted one of its signature events, a formal dinner followed by a late-night theater performance. Passengers filled the dining halls in evening wear, music echoed across the decks, and cameras captured the usual celebratory atmosphere. Karen Mitchell was seen arriving at dinner with Jason Reed. Surveillance shows them seated together, laughing, leaning in close, and appearing comfortable. To fellow passengers, they looked like a couple enjoying their evening. After dinner, they attended the show, leaving the theater around 10:45 p.m. What happened next marked the beginning of Karen's disappearance. Security footage placed the pair walking toward the aft section of the ship just before 11 p.m. The images were clear, Jason guiding Karen with his hand on her back, the two moving away from crowded areas. Witnesses later recalled seeing them on the pool deck, speaking in hushed tones. One passenger described Karen as appearing slightly uneasy, though not alarmed. At 11:07 p.m., Karen's keycard registered its last use near the stairwell leading to service corridors. These were areas typically accessed only by crew, but Jason was seen escorting her inside. From that moment forward, there was no further footage of Karen Mitchell anywhere on the ship. Jason, however, continued moving. His keycard activity showed him on multiple decks over the next 3 hours. At 2:04 a.m., he returned alone to his cabin. Cameras recorded him entering without Karen. By the following morning, Karen did not appear at breakfast. Her cabin was untouched, the bed neatly made, her clothing unpacked, her identification and belongings still in place. There was no evidence she had planned to leave on her own. Ship security launched a search. Announcements were made over the intercom, asking Karen to report to the front desk. Crew members scoured public areas, checked cabins, and reviewed camera footage. The results were the same. Karen had vanished. Jason was interviewed later that day. He claimed Karen had gone back to her cabin after the theater, insisting they had parted ways around 11 p.m. His demeanor was calm, almost detached. He suggested she might be resting or keeping to herself, but the timeline, the keycard data, and the footage contradicted his account. What investigators would later uncover is that Karen never returned to her cabin because she was never meant to. Jason had delivered her into the hands of others working aboard the vessel, individuals linked to a trafficking operation with international reach. The corridors he led her into that night were not random. They were chosen. For Karen, the evening began with dinner and laughter alongside the man she believed was her partner. By midnight, she was gone, removed from the cruise ship she had boarded full of hope, unaware that her journey of love had been a calculated trap. Chapter 5: The Uncovering. When Karen Mitchell was reported missing, the Ocean Star security team initiated its standard emergency protocol. The ship's corridors, cabins, and restricted areas were searched. Passenger rolls were checked and rechecked, but the searches produced nothing. Karen had vanished without a trace. At first, investigators considered the possibility of an accident, a fall overboard, a medical emergency, or even voluntary disappearance. But these theories unraveled quickly. Karen's belongings were all in her cabin: her passport, wallet, clothing, and phone. She had not packed or prepared for departure. Surveillance showed no sign of her leaving the ship alone. Attention turned almost immediately to Jason Reed. Passenger reports described how inseparable the two had been. Surveillance confirmed they had been together right up until the moment Karen vanished. Jason's account, that Karen returned to her cabin after the evening show, did not align with the ship's data. Her keycard had not been used after 11:07 p.m., while Jason's had been active into the early morning hours. When questioned further, Jason grew evasive. His story shifted slightly each time he was interviewed. Investigators noted his unusual composure and lack of concern. While Karen's friends on board appeared distraught, Jason seemed distant, almost rehearsed. The breakthrough came when authorities secured Jason's digital records. Forensic analysis of his phone and laptop uncovered encrypted communications with offshore numbers. These messages outlined a detailed plan: the targeting of a vulnerable passenger, the establishment of trust, and the transfer of that passenger to handlers during the voyage. Karen was never named directly, but the timeline matched her case exactly. The communications left little doubt. Jason was working as a recruiter for an organized trafficking network. His role was to identify targets, groom them, and deliver them into the hands of traffickers who specialized in smuggling individuals across borders by sea. Further investigation revealed that Jason had traveled on multiple cruises over the previous year, often alone, often forming sudden relationships with women who fit similar profiles: single, middle-aged, financially stable, and emotionally isolated. Several of those women were later reported missing under circumstances disturbingly similar to Karen's. It was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. International agencies were alerted, and intelligence sharing quickly confirmed the scope of the operation. The Ocean Star was not the only vessel exploited by traffickers. Cruise ships, with their transient populations and sprawling layouts, had become fertile ground for such crimes. Victims could be isolated, removed, and transferred without immediate detection. In Karen's case, investigators determined she had been escorted into service corridors and then handed off to accomplices working among the crew. From there, she was moved into a concealed compartment used for supplies. By the time the ship docked at its next port, she was already offloaded, unseen by passengers, erased from the manifest, and in the custody of traffickers waiting on shore. For Karen's family, the confirmation was devastating. The hope that she had simply disappeared on her own collapsed under the weight of the evidence. She had not left by choice. She had been taken. Jason Reed was arrested before the Ocean Star completed its route. His arrest marked only the beginning. Through him, investigators were able to trace connections, uncover accomplices, and expose fragments of a network operating across multiple countries. What emerged was not just the story of one missing woman, but proof of a larger, more insidious crime: organized trafficking hidden in plain sight. Chapter 6: The Aftermath. The arrest of Jason Reed stunned passengers on the Ocean Star. For nearly 2 weeks, many had watched him and Karen Mitchell together, convinced they were simply an unlikely couple enjoying a romantic holiday. But when investigators revealed Jason's true role as a recruiter for an organized trafficking network, the story shifted from romance to horror. Digital evidence and witness accounts confirmed what few had dared to imagine. Karen had not disappeared by chance. She had been deliberately targeted, groomed, and delivered into the hands of traffickers waiting at the next port. Jason was not a lover. He was a handler, following orders from a larger network that operated silently across borders. The confirmation was devastating, but it brought clarity. Karen's case was no longer treated as a mystery at sea. It was classified as a trafficking abduction. International agencies became involved, using Jason's arrest to trace contacts, payment routes, and travel patterns. His communications outlined a network that had used cruise lines before, exploiting their vastness and lack of strict oversight to smuggle victims. But while investigators pieced together the logistics, Karen's ultimate fate remained unclear. No direct evidence surfaced of what happened to her after she was escorted into those service corridors and transferred off the Ocean Star. 3 theories emerged. The first was survival in captivity. Some believed Karen had been kept alive within the trafficking system, moved discreetly from port to port, hidden in compounds, and used for exploitation. Anonymous tips suggested women matching her description had been seen months later in foreign cities, though none of these sightings were ever verified. The second theory was immediate sale and relocation. Experts explained that victims in her demographic, older, financially stable, emotionally vulnerable, were often targeted not for long-term exploitation, but for rapid transfer to criminal buyers. In this theory, Karen may have been quickly moved far inland, beyond the reach of maritime investigators. The third, and most unsettling theory, was elimination. Some argued that once Jason was arrested, Karen became a liability to the network. Without confirmation of her rescue or survival, the possibility remained that she had been killed to prevent exposure. No physical evidence supported this conclusion, but the silence around her disappearance kept the fear alive. For Karen's family, the ambiguity was unbearable. They now knew she had been taken, but not whether she was alive, suffering, or gone forever. For investigators, the case was both a breakthrough and a frustration. proof of a trafficking ring's existence, but not the closure of bringing Karen home. Jason Reed was eventually convicted on trafficking-related charges and sentenced to decades in prison. His cooperation was minimal, his answers evasive. He admitted to recruiting Karen, admitting to handing her off, but he never disclosed where she went afterward. The aftermath left a haunting truth. Karen Mitchell's disappearance was not an isolated case, but part of a larger system. Her story exposed how traffickers prey on vulnerability, how charm can be a weapon, and how even in plain sight, people can vanish in networks designed to erase them. What became of Karen remains uncertain. Was she still alive somewhere, waiting to be found? Or had her journey ended long before investigators closed in? The world may never know. Karen Mitchell's story reminds us how easily trust can be twisted into tragedy, and how trafficking often hides in plain sight. If you found this investigation important, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light.